is Kendall Edison, and with the help of my two classmates, Nefertia Jones and Xavier Stamps, we created a presentation that examined what role did the Cold War and the countries involved in it influence the events in the Middle East. The Cold War and the countries involved in it were influential to the events that occurred in the Middle East. By the end of this presentation, we would have examined the roles of the Cold War and the countries involved in it and the effect they had on the Middle East. Briefly, the Cold War was rising tensions between democratic states and communist states after World War II. The Cold War had two sides, the United States, Great Britain, and France that represent the democratic states against Russia, North Korea, and China representing the communist states after World War II. Also, Egypt was giving weapons to Russia during the Cold War. This happened because the Soviet Union did not like the fact that the United States entered World War I late. Due to the fact that the United States entered the war late, millions of Russians died. Since the United States and Soviet Unions have rising tensions between each other, they both developed a lot of nuclear weapons. During this time period, the United States felt that if a country had relations with the Soviet Union, that they are automatically working against them. This was a problem in many events that occurred during this time period, the Cold War. One of the events include the Suez Crisis, which erupted on July 26, 1956, when Egyptian President Abdul Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. The nationalization of the Suez Canal would cripple the British economy, and seeing how this event happened during the Cold War, this resulted in Britain and France struggling to maintain their influence in the Middle East and North Africa, as well as their own sense of relevance. However, the most important detail of the Suez Canal crisis was the fact that Egypt received help from the Soviet Union to cripple America's allies. Due to this, the United States felt that if you are not with us, you are against us. Also, the Egyptian government was giving weapons to Russia, which meant that Egypt was against the United States because they were aiding Russia. The Suez Crisis was influenced by the Cold War because during this period, Great Britain, France, and Israel were trying to take over the Suez Canal. Russia supplied the Egyptians with weapons. The United States didn't want their allies to get involved with Russia's allies, so they found out about the attack. They were mad. Dubbed the lifeline of empire, the canal was an absolute vital resource for oil. If Nasser blocked the precious flow, he could cripple the British economy. This event impacted the Middle East because the Suez Canal was the main water resource for transportation and trading. Also, with the Egyptian government specifically, they felt as though the Western countries were trying to take over their land, and they did not want that in their country. Another event that occurred during the Cold War was the Camp David Accord, which was signed December 17, 1978, and it was a peace treaty between Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin. In this peace treaty signing, the United States were the mediators in this sense. They wanted to sway Egypt away from the influences of the Soviet Union, and Sadat pushed all the Soviets out of Egypt. This event impacted the Middle East because it made a bond with an Arab nation and the Israeli government, and this angered some of the Egyptian people, which caused a revolution in Egypt and later the assassination of Anwar Sadat. Also, it broke the bond between Russia and Egypt, which meant less supplies going into Egypt by the Soviets and a new relationship for Egypt and the United States. Another event that occurred was the Aswan Dam in the 1960s. This event was when Egypt and the United States asked the United States for help and also asked Great Britain, and the United States said no. This resulted in Egypt asking the Soviet Union for help, and they funded the building of the dam, which made their relations stronger. This impacted the Middle East because it showed Egypt who its allies are and who it is willing to help them in their time of need. Also, it made a huge bond between Russia and Egypt and giving the Soviet Union undisturbed access to the Suez Canal so they can continue to trade with other countries. The last event we will examine is the Baghdad Pact, or the Bandung Conference of 1955. In 1955, the Soviet Union supplied Egypt with weapons. At first, the Soviet Union was on Israel's side, but due to violations in the security discussion, the Soviet Union decided to change sides. The Soviet Union even badmouthed the Jews on mass media, stating that the Jews and Americans were racist imperialists. The Bandung Conference later in 1955 was a meeting between countries who wanted to have peace during the Cold War. Some of the third world countries involved had a common goal: to stop relying on the United States and Europe. They did this because they did not want to have to be a part of a war due to their alliance with large popular countries. This event impacted the Middle East because it made things clear about the alliances that existed and the alliances that are to come. Also, it showed how some of the third world countries felt about having to depend on larger, more developed countries for support at the time. And it showed the Soviet Union's feelings about the United States and Jewish people, which could have caused tension as far as the Cold War. Overall, the Cold War greatly impacted the Middle East. If it wasn't for the United States and Russia's contribution to Israel and Palestine, their conflicts would not have been so extreme. The one thing that was a constant impact with all five events was the alliance systems between different countries, especially the alliances that the Soviet Union made with other countries that made the United States nervous and refusing to help the countries that were allied with the Soviet Union.